The census data for OZ 2.0 is out, but how Treasury uses it is still undecided. And if eligibility is determined by spreadsheet alone, some communities will be excluded for statistical reasons, not economic reality. Today, we're talking about how Treasury should get this right. Next on the Opportunity Zones podcast. On January 29th, 2026, the U.S. Census Bureau released its 2020 through 2024 ACS 5-year data. That's the data set that Treasury has informally indicated it expects to rely on when determining Opportunity Zones 2.0 eligibility. And last week, I published an analysis using that data to show which census tracts appear eligible if Treasury goes in that direction. But the statute itself is silent on how Treasury should make those determinations. It doesn't specify which ACS vintage must be used, how margins of error should be treated, or what to do when income data is missing or unreliable. And that's where today's conversation gets really interesting, because how Treasury interprets that data, especially when it comes to margins of error and unreliable income estimates, will materially shape which communities are actually eligible. To talk through those issues, I'm pleased to be joined today by Jason Watkins. Jason is partner at Novogradac, and he's also chairman of the Novogradac Opportunity Zones Working Group, whose recent implementation guidance letter to Treasury makes the case for a common sense, policy-aligned approach to eligibility. Let's dive into that in just a moment here. But first, Jason, thanks for joining the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's good to see you again. It's been a couple of weeks now, I guess, since we spent some time together. So good to see you, at least virtually.
We did, yeah. You got to hang out with me in Dallas a couple weeks ago. It's always good to see you, Jason. And again, thanks for joining the show today. You sent me your implementation letter last night, the night before we're recording this episode, and you released it this morning after you had sent it to Treasury. And it's fascinating because it tackles the issue of this ACS data being unreliable in a lot of ways. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, my question to you is, Jason, why is this moment in time right now? We're recording this early February 2026, right after the ACS data comes out, but before Treasury issues eligibility guidance. We're expecting that Treasury may publish a list of eligible census tracts. Why is this window right now such a critical window for Treasury to get OZ 2.0 implementation right?
Right. Well, this is the one chance, right? The raw data is out, but that list of eligible census tracts and the instructions has not yet been sent to the chief executive officers of the states and territories. So this is it. We have a short window of time to take a look at some of the raw data, see some issues with it, and then hopefully offer guidance. And we have offered guidance to Treasury on how they could look at the data a little bit differently, and then provide instructions to the chief executive officers for some of these census tracts where the data being reported through the ACS is not particularly reliable.
And yeah, it is highly unreliable in a lot of cases. According to the analysis that I ran last week, the average tract level median family income margin of error is over 26%, which is really high, obviously. For some tracts, it's single digit percentage points is the margin of error. For other tracts, it's well over 50%. Then there's also a lot of tracts all around the country that have no income data whatsoever. We'll dive into that a little bit more as the show progresses. But my next question for you, you framed that really nicely, like why now is the crucial time for Treasury to get this right. It's really the only time to do it is in this period after the ACS data comes out, but before Treasury makes their final decision and publishes the list of eligible tracts. What's the risk if Treasury treats those ACS estimates as definitive eligibility cutoffs rather than recognizing them as survey estimates with real statistical uncertainty?
Well, the risk is that there are some truly low income census tracts that, due to a statistical anomaly, are left off of the eligible list, and so they can't be nominated or designated by governors. And that would be a tragedy certainly from the perspective of those census tracts that certainly would appear to meet and maybe historically have met the requirements, but because of this one set of data that may be subject to a very large margin of error, they would not even be included in the list of census tracts that governors will be presented from which they'll make their nominations.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a moment now. For those who are scratching their heads, wondering, wait, what are these guys talking about? What is this census data? I thought they only did the census every 10 years. What is ACS? So for listeners who aren't steeped in census methodology like you and I are, can you explain why median family income at the census tract level can be so unreliable? And why does that matter so much under OZ 2.0's tighter thresholds?
Sure. So at a high level, so what the American Community Survey is, it's basically it's a continuous national survey that is run by the Census Bureau. So it is still census data, but this is not the big, you know, decennial every 10 years census, 2020, 2030. This is something that's run continuously year after year. And then that data over a 5-year period, that data is then sort of aggregated. And that 5-year data is what will be used by Treasury to identify the census tracts. So it's a survey. It's not a full count of the population. Okay. So because it's a survey, it's going to be subject, just like any presidential poll you might see, there's always a margin of error. Based on, if we reran this survey 1,000 times, how often would it appear within a certain range, right? That's the margin of error, plus and minus. And the ACS data, these estimates that are given for median family income it's based on 90% confidence. So if there's 90% chance that the actual number is within this range, that's what the margin of error accomplishes. And so it's all dependent on how many surveys are completed for each census tract. So if there aren't very many surveys that are done out of what the entire population is, the data is going to be subject to a pretty high margin of error. Sometimes the margin of error is so large that the Census Bureau doesn't even publish an estimate for the data, because statistically, when they run the margin of error is actually larger than the estimate itself. So they just don't publish any data at all. And I think we've run the numbers, Jimmy. It's going to vary from place to place, but overall, about 3% of the census tracts in the United States don't have a median family income estimate. Now, some of those are going to be national parks and airports, places like that naturally don't have a population, so that estimate can't be done. But there's still a very significant number of census tracts that, just because of the statistical anomaly of not gathering enough responses to the survey, there's no data presented. And this is, according to Treasury, like you said, it's not official yet, but they've said that they expect this to be the data source used to identify eligible tracts.
Yeah, and I think this term came up on a call we were on earlier today. We should consider that provisional guidance, not formal guidance, because they've only ever verbally spoken about this in informal settings. Nothing's in writing yet. As I mentioned before, the statute is silent on how to actually determine this, so it is open to some interpretation. Jason, I want to do something crazy. I want to share my screen and actually show our viewers at home what one of these data downloads from the American Community Survey looks like. And what we're looking at right now, there's over 85,000 lines in this thing, so we won't go through every one, but this is the data that shows median family income for every single census tract. Each census tract is a line in this file. And at the top here, first of all, here's the headline number. I'm going to bold it right now. This 26.37% is the average margin of error that the Census Bureau has determined for each census tract. And I've calculated it in column F here. You can see, we're just kind of scrolling through these counties in Alabama. There's a handful of them that have a single digit margin of error, but you can see the vast majority of them are in the 20s or 30s or even higher. Here's one, Census Tract 9502 in Barber County, Alabama, has a margin of error of 54%. The one below it has a margin of error of 64%. So, and then we've got this separate.
Let's look at that one right there, Jimmy. The one you're on right now.
Yeah.
Barber County. Three lines below that. The one was 64.65%.
Yeah, here we go, right here. So Census Tract 9503 in Barber County, Alabama.
Okay, now I don't happen to have Alabama's area median family income up,
Yeah.
but in order to qualify, when you take this estimate of median family income for a census tract, you compare that to the area median family income for that part of the state. It's either a metropolitan statistical area or it's the statewide area. And you look at the median family income. So that 74,167 can't be more than 70% of whatever area it's in and still qualify to be nominated and designated as an OZ.
Right.
So let's say for argument's sake, do you have it? Look at
I'm
you.
gonna I'm gonna see if I can find it here on my other big one here. That was 9503, I think. Is that what we said? That's this one right here.
Yeah,
So
so
it is
83,000.
not OZ eligible right here because this $74,167 tract level median family income is very close to the statewide median family income of $83,032. In fact, it's 89% of the statewide total, which
Right. So
puts it outside
yeah,
of the range.
right. To be eligible, that has to be under 70%.
Correct.
So we're at 74,167. We'll disregard the poverty, but it looks like your tract poverty is 11.9%. Actually, I just saw that
Correct.
on your other one. So that
Yep.
means that this tract is not eligible. But look
Correct.
at the margin of error, 64%. So that means that there's a 90% likelihood, right, that the actual median family income for the census tract is 47,947 plus or minus of the 74,167. So
Right.
in order to be at 70%, it would need to be what, around 60,000 or so?
Something like that. Yeah.
Um,
So we'll go back to this sheet here. You can see, yeah, that could definitely push it well below. If we
right.
subtract
So it's,
$47,000 from this number, that's going to put it comfortably within
yeah.
eligibility.
So the the margin, the amount that this census tract's estimate exceeds that 70% threshold, well within the margin of error.
Yep.
Um, and in this case, and so what we're recommending, like Jimmy said, is what we think is sort of a common sense way that a governor that looks at this census tract and says, well, I disagree with this number. I would like the governor of Alabama to, so I think this census tract is and should be eligible. And we want to give that governor some flexibility. We think that to be able to present to Treasury some additional evidence that they've gathered for why this census tract. And this isn't the only place that this number is used, okay? This median family income data is used by the Department of HUD in establishing income limits. And these income limits are used in a whole bunch of different HUD programs, right? So HUD, if it sees a margin of error greater than 50%, HUD says in its own guidance, that's unreliable data. And then they provide a methodology for going a little bit further back in the data, not 10 years back or anything, but 2 or 3 years back in these 5-year American Community Survey surveys, looking at that data from previous 5-year cycles to see if they can get to data that is more reliable and then make an assessment then.
So there's a couple of precedents here that we're touching on. You're touching on the precedent of HUD taking the same problem and applying a methodology that cures for the unreliable data. Another precedent that Treasury set themselves with this very program was in 2018 when Treasury enabled the states to rely on two different ACS dataset vintages, essentially.
Right, right.
One of them was, let me see if I can remember correctly. If I remember correctly, one of them was 2011 through 2015, and the other one was 2012 through 2016. The 2012 through 2016 data came out, I believe, right around the time the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act
It was
was
before that.
enacted.
It came out
It
in
was
the
before that. Okay.
fall. So it was actually out. The 2012 to 2016 was out before this ever hit the books.
Okay.
The OZ Incentive did. Yet governors were still given that flexibility to use two data sets,
To go back one additional year if they needed to,
or
right?
the 2012 to 2016. We think that's reasonable. And in this case, the data came out well after the 2020 to 2024 just came out last week. So it's much, much later in the process. So again, one of our recommendations is to allow for both the 2019 to 2023 or the 2020 to 2024 5-year ACS data to be used by governors in selecting.
Right. I think that's important that you're not asking Treasury to reinvent the wheel here, right?
Not at all.
You're saying, hey, let's apply the same methodology that was used in 2018 regarding the availability of two different data sets to be used. And then also look at what HUD is doing, because HUD is already solved for this in many ways. So some people may hear that you and I are advocating to allow for the executives of these different jurisdictions, mostly the governors of the states, plus the governors of the overseas territories and mayor of Washington, D.C. We want them to have more flexibility, right? Some people might hear that and they worry about abuse. In your letter, you do propose some guardrails around exactly how this could be put into use. I'm curious, maybe you could walk us through, how does your proposal in the letter strike that balance between preventing abuse and avoiding arbitrary exclusion of some very deserving tracts?
Right. Well, I mean, first off, it's important to note that we're not advocating that the overall number of eligible or actual designations increase any. So we're not saying, well, let's grow the population from which these governors can get 25% of, which would then increase the total number of opportunities. We're not saying that at all. The number of zones would still be limited to what the statute defines. What we're asking for is for some flexibility in that set number of census tracts that the governor gets to nominate, that there be some flexibility to look at a census tract a little harder than this one estimate number that is provided as part of the 2020 to 2024 ACS.
Okay, I think that's a really important distinction. I'm looking over to my screen again because I did want to just pull up what I've been working on, which is the data analysis that I came out with the day after the ACS data came out, where I was able to determine for every single state how many eligible tracts they have according to this newly released data set. So Alabama, for instance, we're picking on Alabama today because they come first in the alphabet. So we were looking at Barber County, Alabama. Now we're looking at Alabama, the state. Based on the data that came out on January 29th, Alabama would have 563 eligible tracts to be nominated for OZ 2.0. Based on the 25% statutory cap, that would mean that they would designate 140 opportunity zones, which is a bit of a decline. Currently, they have 158 zones. So in the OZ 2.0 framework, they'd have only 140, and so on and so forth. The majority of the states would see a decline in their total number of zones. By the way, if you're looking at this at home and wondering how to take a look at this, you can find this on my website. Head to opportunityzones.com/census data. Have full analysis on every state. 3 states pick up a couple of zones, but for the most part, most states lose zones. The footprint of opportunity zones is smaller. Nationwide, I'm anticipating at the end of the day, there's going to be about 6,500 opportunity zones in OZ 2.0, compared to what we have today is 8,764. So what Jason is saying is we don't want to increase this pool of zones beyond 25,000 and change. We want this to be the same number of zones at the end of the day, roughly 6,500 and change. But on these edge cases where there's a tract that is close to eligibility and the margin of error is really huge, let's allow the executives of these different jurisdictions, the governors of the states, some leeway in nominating certain tracks that may fall just outside of the lines if the data is unreliable. Is that right?
That's exactly right. If it's close, let's take a little bit more of a look because the data is very noisy. And with that large of a margin of error, we think it's worth taking a second look and giving governors that flexibility. And really, what we're proposing isn't that complicated. We sort of see two different buckets of potential census tracts, right? There's census tracts that currently are, or at least are located in. Um, so potentially eligible census tracts that are still located in a census tract that is currently an opportunity zone. So for those where we know that these were definitely needy areas, these were low income communities, the bar is a little bit lower. What we're proposing there is that if there's a margin of error of say 35% of the estimate, which is still super high, or if these census tracts don't have an estimate at all because of there being too small of a number of responses to the survey, then those tracks should at least have some additional, the governors have the ability to do some additional research and provide additional evidence to Treasury for why they would choose to nominate that. If the census tract is not within a current opportunity zone, then we would set the bar a little higher and move that margin of error up to 50%. That would sort of reduce the number a little bit of potential census tracts that would fall into this eligibility flexibility that we would give to governors, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I think we ran these numbers really quickly right before we hit record. But if I recall correctly, I think we decided that roughly 3% of the census tracts have no income or there's no income reported.
Right.
In this
There's
most
no
recent
median
ACS survey.
family income reported for about 3% of the nationwide tracts. And like I noted earlier, we know some of those are airports and parks and whatnot, but a lot of them are just census tracts that the data wasn't there. I have looked at several that are currently opportunity zones. So we know that they were low income communities, but there's no median family income for that census tract on the 2020 to 2024 ACS. Might have been there for 2019 and 2023, that 5 year set, but not in the 2020 to 2024.
And yeah,
So that's
the issue there is that they got so few responses to their survey that the U.S. Census Bureau themselves are saying this data is unreliable. We're not even going to publish it. Is
they
that right?
didn't even publish it because it's so unreliable. They didn't
Right.
publish it.
Right. And then sometimes we're able to go to the poverty rate. If the poverty rate is 20% or greater, then it can be deemed an opportunity zone as well, but only if the median family income doesn't exceed 125% of its metropolitan area or statewide total. And
Right.
so
And there are,
if that's
yeah,
not being
yeah,
reported, we're not quite sure what to do there. That guardrail wasn't part of the original OZ 1.0 designation process, so it wasn't an issue. But now it's a little bit unclear. Can we rely solely on the poverty metric for determining OZ 2.0 eligibility if there's no MFI data for that tract?
right.
I think yes, but I don't know for sure.
We all think yes, right?
Yeah,
Because that's will be the logical resolution here, but we don't know that. It's not in the guidance anywhere, so we don't know. We
yeah,
don't know.
yeah. Well, look, states are going to be preparing for that nomination window soon. It's quickly approaching. A lot of states are starting to gear up for the OZ 2.0 process. Some states are more on top of it than others. I go to some states' websites and their opportunity zone page doesn't exist anymore or it's wildly out of date. Other
Yeah.
states, and I'll mention a few of them: California, Ohio, Colorado, Kentucky, a handful of others, Texas, state I'm in right now. They've done a great job. They've already kind of rolled out their OZ 2.0 process, or they have a little bit of content or material about the OZ 2.0 process. They're thinking about it. They're hosting webinars on it. They're hosting roundtables on it. All that is to say, this is coming pretty soon. The July 1, 2026 date is when the 90-day, I'm really calling it a 120-day period because it's extendable by 30 days. So the 90 to 120-day period for the states to nominate their census tracts starts July 1. It's going to continue through September or October for states that want to drag out the full window. But a lot of the work starts now or even last year. It started basically when the ink dried on President Trump's signature on the OBBBA. So this is happening very quickly now. We're going to get to July 1. From your perspective, how urgent is it that Treasury resolve these questions? And also, when do you think we'll hear from them?
I don't know. It's really an unknown at this point. Maybe it's next week, maybe it's tomorrow. Maybe it can't be too long because the states are going to need time to vet all these potential census tracts. Remember, they can only nominate 25% of them. So they're going to have to distribute the list to all the different city and counties out there that are going to be part of this process of, say, hey, county A, you have 4 census tracts that are eligible, rank those. So that has to happen at the state level, but it has to go out to so many people. And so this guidance needs to happen very soon. And that's why we really worked hard to get our recommendations together and over to Treasury for some additional steps we would like to encourage them to take in the guidance that they provide out to the states and territories.
Running low on time here. I got a couple more questions for you. Wanted to touch on a couple of edge cases, which you've been having some conversations with some folks about. I've been having some conversations with some folks about as well. Really interesting. If you look at Wyoming and Vermont, they actually have very few eligible census tracts. And the statute says states are allowed to designate up to 25% of their low income census tracts. There's an exception for states with a small amount of tracts. If a state has fewer than 100 eligible tracts, they can nominate 25 tracts. But the question becomes, what happens if a state has fewer than 25 tracts? And that is the case with Wyoming. According to my data analysis, they will only have 20 eligible tracts, and Vermont will have only 24. So what are your thoughts there, Jason? And what do you think the statute says, and how should Treasury interpret? Do those states get 25 somehow, or do they just have to live with the below 25 number?
We don't know. Again, like you said, the statute doesn't define that. Our thoughts, and it wasn't an issue in the first round because states had the ability to nominate less, or I guess better off census tracts. The percentage of area median income that a census tract could have in the first round was 80%. That was reduced to 70%. So that drop of 2,200 zones that Jimmy highlighted earlier, that's where that comes from. So because of it, there's just fewer, the population is smaller. There's fewer census tracts that can be eligible. So the statute didn't think that through, I guess. It's pretty close. I mean, we're 20 and 24. Our thoughts are for those states that don't have a sufficient number, maybe slightly broaden the population and the requirements for those states just a little bit, so that they can get to 25, perhaps lower that poverty threshold from 20 to some slightly lower number, or increase that MFI from 70% to some slightly higher number, that whatever it would take for those states to get to that 25 threshold. We think that would be a reasonable solution. Plus, as we've discussed, the data is pretty noisy anyway. So it's very likely that there are more eligible tracts than what the state's being given credit for to begin with.
Yeah, I think Treasury might have a hard time overriding the statute. I think the 20%, the 70% numbers going to be hard to budge on those. I think where they have some wiggle room is determining what to do with the margin of error, though. I think that's the key.
I've already done some analysis on that, and there are plenty of census tracts in those states that are close, that the margin of error would then pull them in. So I think that's probably the route you'd have to go. I think it would be more difficult to, through regulation, to override a statutory percentage that's given.
Right. Okay, so big picture, closing thoughts here as we wind down today. Let's say Treasury does adopt a common sense approach to eligibility now, and then they issue some guidance, and we all love it because it kind of takes a lot of this into account. How much does that common sense approach that we are advocating for Treasury to take, how much does that shape the success of OZ 2.0 before the first designation is even made?
I mean, I think it's very important to make sure that all truly eligible census tracts are getting included in the pot. It doesn't mean that there are going to be that many that are using this methodology to bring in additional census tracts into what they can make a nomination for. Uh, but I think it's super important to deal with now because we can't really fix it later. This is the time to get that guidance out there so that if the governors and the local and county and city folks are identifying a census tract that they think should be there, that they have time to do additional research on that census tract and then present their case to Treasury for why it should be included. And it
Uh,
needs to happen soon. They'll need time for that.
yeah, sooner rather than later, hopefully. We should find out soon. I'm looking forward to how it all unfolds. Jason, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for sharing that letter to Treasury with us. Before we go, if our audience is interested in learning more about your firm, Novogradac and Company, or your Novogradac Opportunity Zones working group, can you tell us a little bit about both of those and where they can go to learn more?
Sure. Best place to go to learn more about opportunity zones is novoco.com. That's novoco.com. Once you're there, you can go to our Opportunity Zones Resource Center. It's just a compendium of all the work that we've done as a firm and within our Opportunity Zones working group to advocate and educate around the Opportunity Zones incentive. So that's a great place to go. Uh, Jimmy, normally you'll provide a link to that in the show notes. We appreciate that. The Opportunity Zones Working Group that I had, that is a collection of Opportunity Zones industry advocates and professionals, service providers, funds, Opportunity Zone businesses. Really, it's a great cross section of the entire OZ industry. These stakeholders, we get together on at least a monthly basis. We propose these recommendation letters that we send to Treasury, that we send to members of House and the Senate, to the White House. We're advocating for the OZ incentive constantly. We're also helping to create best practices for use in by opportunity funds, by opportunity zone businesses and others. So you can read about that as well within our Opportunity Zones Resource Center. We do have a link to the working group there. If you're interested in joining, please reach out to me.
Perfect. And for our listeners and viewers out there today, if you enjoyed today's show, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up. And as Jason mentioned, I will have show notes available on our website at opportunityzones.com/podcast. And there I'll have links to all of the resources that Jason and I discussed on today's show. Please also be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast app to always get the latest episodes. Jason, thanks again for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Always happy to join you, Jimmy. Thanks.